Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and good morning to some of you on the West Coast. My name is Michelle Noth-McCready, and I am going to be presenting on advocacy versus lobbying today for our Lunch and Learn series. I'm the Senior State and Local Policy Advisor here at Child Care Aware of America, and we are going to talk about the differences between advocacy versus lobbying and what exactly that means. Talk a little bit about the tax code and how you can know which one you're doing at what time if you're in the limits, and we'll talk a little bit about some other 501c3 nonprofit activities that nonprofits can participate in. Then this series is just based on questions that we've received over time here at Child Care Aware of America in advocacy trainings, or just questions that people have had and other webinars that have come up. So I want to make sure that I get to your questions in a timely manner. So if you have a question, don't wait. We want to make sure that we answer it and you don't forget it. So even if we get to it at the end, please locate your chat box on the right side of your screen. And throughout the presentation, please feel free to chat a question. And at the end, I will try my best to answer it. A couple other things for the Lunch and Learn webinars. We don't offer any certificates. That's for our Child Care Aware Parent Network webinars or our CCAPN webinars that happen typically in the evening. And I'll show you where you can locate those on our website at the end if you have questions about that. But we did get 1 or 2 questions about webinar certificates, and we don't offer them for these Lunch and Learn series. Okay, so again, what we're talking about in our Lunch and Learn today, we're going to go over what advocacy means, what lobbying means, what are the allowable activities in both advocacy and lobbying, and then we'll talk a little bit about expense limits, and we'll go over some resources of how you can know if you're staying within the lines of advocacy versus lobbying. Okay, so a lot of time you may hear the word "we participate in advocacy" and wonder what exactly does that mean. And it's really a broad definition. It's basically standing up for what you believe in and sharing what you're passionate about and what you see. So it's not, I think people confuse lobbying and advocacy because when they hear the word advocacy, a lot of people want to shy away and think that you're asking for a direct co-sponsor of a bill or something specific and that you can't do if you were funded 100% by the government or something like that. So advocacy, again, is basically education and sharing what you see, what you're passionate about, and being kind of a vehicle of information about something that you believe in. So that's the broad definition of advocacy. And lobbying, on the other hand, there's 2 different kinds of lobbying. One refers to direct lobbying, and the other refers to grassroots lobbying. So direct lobbying is actual direct communication with a legislator or on their staff. So if you have a Hill meeting, if you're in Washington, D.C., and you go meet with a congressman or a senator, that's a direct lobbying action. And you, when you're meeting with them, if you are talking about a specific piece of legislation, a specific bill, and you're asking them to take a position on it, that is, again, direct lobbying. So you're direct lobbying, meeting with the legislator or staff, and asking them either to support Senate Bill such and such, 581, or vote yes on this bill or no on this bill. That is the direct form of lobbying, so having a specific ask. Grassroots lobbying is communication with the public that does the following things. It refers to specific legislation, so it is it's an information vehicle to the grassroots, to citizens, that refers to specific legislation. So when you're saying in an email or any kind of communication to the field or citizens or parents or providers, child care providers, or staff members, whatever that is, it's saying we support, you take a position on a legislation, we support bill number 581, and you tell the View why you're supporting that bill. And it can typically, grassroots lobbying contains a call to action. So the difference, again, between the grassroots and direct is you meeting directly with a legislator or staff. Grassroots is drumming up that support from citizens, from the general public, potentially, that refers to specific legislation and typically contains a call to action, asking them to do something. Please write your senator. Please write your state legislator, and providing them the contact information, etc. That's what a call to action is. It's saying we want to pass this bill. Make sure you call your senator. Make sure you email them. Make sure you write them. Giving them a specific task to do in reference to a certain piece of legislation is what a call to action is. So if you are curious about what your nonprofit does, the fact is it all depends on the tax code. The IRS does not prohibit lobbying at all by nonprofits, except, and the one exception is if your nonprofit happens to be 100% funded by the government, then you cannot lobby. And you have a restriction, and if you're not funded by the government, you have a restriction on your lobbying expenses based on your budget, the annual budget. And nonprofit agencies have different choices about how they track their lobbying expenses, and tracking is just simply for your own agency's protection in case of an audit. So we're going to go over what those lobbying expense restrictions are, and how you can figure out if you are within the limits of them. So the IRS, there's two different types of tests that the IRS has to determine and track lobbying expenses done by your nonprofit. The insubstantial part test is really not used. I'm not going to go too much into detail with it because it's way more complex than the typical 501H expenditure test, which is less paperwork and which nonprofits tend to use. But I just wanted you to know that that is another option as a test, and I'll explain a little bit about it. It's kind of the default test the IRS uses, and there's not really a clear definition like the 501H, which we'll go over, but it's more of an IRS's tool to track lobbying expenses. But the 501H expenditure test, I'll just give you a little history about it quickly. In 1976, Congress passed Section 501H, which sets dollar limits on nonprofits' lobbying expenses. And this legislation was enacted to help nonprofits and not restrict them, so encourage lobbying activity, in a way that doesn't hurt the nonprofit. And basically, I'll show you the resource of where the 501H, you can locate that in the IRS's tax documents. The form is 5768, which I have a link to down here. But basically, it reflects the section of the tax code, so when your nonprofit's filing taxes, you just have to file it once. And it gives you clear guidance about dollar limits, which I'll show you the formula in a minute. And you only have to file it one time, and your agency can revoke it at any time. If you don't want to have it filed in your taxes, you don't have to. So the form is, again, 5768, and that is the 501H expenditure test that can that can make it completely legal for you to, as a nonprofit, participate in lobbying activities if you're within the limit, your agency's limit. So what are those limits? And without boring everybody to tears and trying to make everyone figure out math, it's really, really simple. And I want to make sure that if I'm not clear that I answer any questions about the lobbying expense limits, and make sure that everyone on the webinar understands exactly what the limits are. So the first 20%, the 20% of the first 500,000, you can use for lobbying. So if your agency has a budget of 500,000 annual budget, you have a limit of $100,000 in lobbying expenses that you can use. Okay, and so if you have another 500,000 on top of that, then it goes from 20%, it's another 15% of that next 500,000, and then the next 500,000 is 10%, and the next 500,000 is 5%. And that's up to $1 million. So as you can see, it decreases in the percentage the higher your budget is, but it's still quite a bit of money to use towards a total lobbying expense. And so if you have the formula down here, is that if you have a $1 million budget, let's just say, you have a limit of $175,000 for lobbying, then this is, you can see in the parentheses, so this is the $100,000 of that first lobbying plus that 15% times 500,000. So that's the formula you can use for the total amount you can spend on lobbying expenses. And a piece of those total lobbying dollars you can spend, there's some grassroots limits on what you can actually do. So grassroots expenditures are capped at 25% of the agency's total budget. So for example, if your lobbying budget is, you figured out from that equation on the last page, is a $100,000 limit, the grassroots lobbying is 25% of that. So you can spend $25,000 on grassroots lobbying. And again, that's that call to action, maybe an advocacy day, getting people to support a specific piece of legislation. That's what that grassroots lobbying is. So just to recap again, the total direct lobbying expenses you can spend are, for the budget is, if you have a budget of $500,000, you get that first 20% you can spend on lobbying, and a piece of that, so that's $100,000, right? A piece of that, which is 25%, can be to spend on grassroots lobbying. Okay, I know it sounds complicated, but once you sit down, you're like, okay, this is our budget. You know, we have this much in lobbying dollars, we have this much in grassroots lobbying dollars, we're good to go. And we recommend that your agency files under 501H. It's simple, it's clear, it's saying you have this amount of money, and this is, you know, a good way to track it too. And it's pretty generous, so you don't have to worry about going over, because you'll know exactly how much you have left for total lobbying and grassroots lobbying. And also, the insubstantial doesn't have any clear guidelines like this does, so most nonprofits opt for the 501H measure. So we got some questions last time about elections and what type of political activity a nonprofit can participate in, and is that direct lobbying, grassroots lobbying, what is that? And basically, 501c3s that have filed that, either if they have filed the 501H or not, they can participate in some election activity, but not all. So I want to go over the yeses and the nos of what you can participate in and what you need to stay away from as a 501c3. Yes, you can register people to vote. Yes, you can distribute nonpartisan materials on the candidates and on ballot measures, so informational materials. And again, if you're distributing information on candidates, you have to include all candidates on the ballot. You can sponsor nonpartisan candidate forums or debates, help new voters understand elections and the voting process. You can also provide briefings to all candidates on the organization's issues, and we really encourage that. So if you're a nonprofit, can meet with a local representative in your area and talk about the issues, that's a great way to build relationships, and it's completely within the 501c election activity guidelines. You can encourage and help people get out to the polls on Election Day. So these are all different things you can do around general election activity. What you should stay away from as a 501c3 is endorsing candidates for office, contributing money to candidates, letting candidates use any office equipment, office space, paper, pencils, all that stuff is a no-no, any other resources. Rating candidates, candidate X was rated A on our report card compared to candidate Y was a C, on children's issues. You can't do that publicly as a 501c3. And you can't publicize which candidates shared the organization's views on a contested issue, saying this candidate supports our measures, and so we are going to endorse them. So you have to be really careful about all the different types of endorsement and participation with election activity when you're 501c3. But there is, if you again review the yes list of what you are allowed to do, there's a lot of room to get involved and to educate different legislators on issues relating to child care. Okay, so just as a quick follow-up to some resources that I talked about, again, that 501H form, that was all the different numbers and figures. If you are not sure where your nonprofit stands, make sure that you have the 501H form filed if you want to do lobbying activities, and talk to anybody in the finance department if you're not that person, or if you are a smaller nonprofit and you're just interested in doing this, it's pretty simple once you're filing taxes to file the 501H form. For any type of IRS related questions, you can refer to the IRS website, and I have it up here. And then also there's a resource that we use when we're looking at staying within the guidelines and making sure we're on track with advocacy versus lobbying. We use the resource of Alliance for Justice. They're a nonprofit that deals with a lot of different questions from nonprofits about staying within the guidelines. And I have their contact information up there and their email address. So if you have any specific questions about your agency, they're a great resource. And of course, us here at Child Care Aware of America are happy to assist you with any of the things that I've talked about, or if you have any further questions about advocacy. And my email is michelle.notes@usa.childcareaware.org, and I would be happy to assist you with any questions you have in the future, or with any of the stuff that I talked about. So with that, looks like we have a couple minutes here for questions, and I want to make sure that I get to them. So if you have a question, please type it in the question box, and we'll take a minute here to let you do that. Okay, I have a request to go back and view the grassroots lobbying limits, and basically just I want to review the actual formula here. So if you have $100,000 total to do lobbying with based on the formula of the 20% from before, your grassroots limit is capped at 25%. So that would be $25,000. So again, out of your total budget, your limit is capped at 25% for grassroots lobbying. Okay, it looks like we have another question. Would a child care program funded by public school be considered to be 100% funded by the government? That's a great question. If you're hosted within a public school, you want to make sure you ask anybody who works in the finance department, if your budget is 100% for the child care program, if that's 100% funded by the local and federal government, or if there's any other sources, if there's any grants or if there's any fundraising or anything else done in addition to that budget, then you can do the lobbying activities we talked about. So you really have to figure out if the child care program is funded like the school program is funded, and if it's 100%, then you have to be careful of lobbying activities, but not advocacy. You can still do advocacy if you're not asking people to take a specific stance on an issue. But if there's any other streams of funding coming in, grants, fundraising, donations, etc., for the child care program, then you are allowed to participate in lobbying activities. Hope that answers your question, Jill. Yep, looks like it does. Okay, and if you have any further questions about that, totally follow up with me. Okay, so again, here is my email address, and we would be more than happy to help you with any tax stuff or questions that you may have in the future as you're looking at doing some lobbying activities. So thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day. If it's your lunch hour, if it's your coffee break, we really appreciate you joining these Lunch and Learn series. I'll be sending out this PowerPoint as a follow-up, and it's located on our website, which I'll show you here. We're at www.usa.childcareaware.org. And you can always find all of our policy webinars and all these Lunch and Learns. If you go to Public Policy, Policy Webinars, scroll down, then here we are. We have all of our webinars listed here. And this one will be posted in about an hour. It just takes a little while to download. But other than that, we'll have it posted. So if you wanted to share it with anyone, I will be available. Great. Well, thank you guys all for taking the time, and we'll hear you next time. Take care.